just in a few seconds. Yeah, here we go.
Awesome.
Welcome back, Big DataCon audience. In this session, I have brought with me Gad. He's living in Tel Aviv, currently located. And here's another exciting topic, namely how you can kick as a remote team here. As you know, during the pandemic, it was a difficult last 1.5 years right now for all of us. And Gad has brought an interesting topic, namely how to scale a team purely remotely. And before the pandemic was just one person. Nowadays is 25, even in a city that is small. How do you do it? Where are the advantages, and what are the disadvantages, and how can you move that from the gain, from the pain to a gain? Gard, the stage is yours. Please,
Thank you.
please share your screen.
Thank you
Looking
very
forward.
much, Georg. You summed it up perfectly. So one moment. Chrome tab. Cool. Georg, is everything okay from your side?
Everything is working out.
Awesome. So hi everyone. As Georg mentioned, today we're going to make our engineering teams kick ass. It's not going to be your ordinary scientific talk or usual tech talk. As we all know, people management in many ways is an extremely complicated challenge. It is also by definition because people are complicated, right? Every person is complex, complicated, challenging in his own very way. Now take that one person and put it together, but like with dozen of people. So you have now dozen of different people, different motivations, different backgrounds. And on top of that, as you mentioned as well, there's a global pandemic, which is preventing us from meeting each other. Everyone is working from remote. And now we have a big challenge, right? Because we have a dozen of people, again, different motivations, different issues, different personalities, unable to organically network together. And these are challenges, right? And these challenges are only for us made to beat them. And this talk should give you basically the understanding that with structured and collaborative mapping of team challenges and thinking about the right team framework, remote work is, I would say, an opportunity, especially in times like this, because I truly believe that in times and remote frameworks like we're having now, small startups and medium-sized companies are on level terms with the big teams, and it's an opportunity for everyone. So because now the main most important resource is the human resource, and the only framework is not the office or the building or the nice entrance or lobby, but it's the team framework. So this if I'm thinking about this talk, and I've been giving it for the past months, and I can see more and more teams that the more focused teams are putting on their framework is something that we gain momentum with. So this is something that team building is a very cautious and a very complex process. But at the end, if there's an organized way of creating flow for the teams to grow and deliver, I think, and I'm sure, because this is something I'm going to share from the past experience from the past year, this is something that we all can gain from. So today we're going to start changing things in the way we work and build teams, and the way everyone here can make a change. So yalla, let's go. So a few words about myself. Hi everyone. I'm Gad Salner, group manager for Melio, an awesome fintech startup that helps to keep small business in business. I joined Melio last April when the apocalypse movie that's also called The Beginning of COVID started. And as you mentioned, so from one engineer in the team when I joined, we're currently a group of 25 amazing and talented engineers who are developing the client-facing app of our company. So throughout my career, I've been an engineer and manager for different startups, small and large, but I'll focus on the two recent ones, which are WeWork, so I guess most of you have heard of, and Melio, the current workplace. And this is tech God, but there is also another God which is actually influences God as tech God as well. Because in the past 10 years, I've been also together with my two of my good friends, and we're also running a documentary project documenting and celebrating Israel's diverse society through the prism of lower league football. Yes, so the project includes mainly photograph exhibitions, documentary video magazine, different productions, and of basically of our journey through Israeli football culture. I know it's not Israel is not famous for Israeli football, but I think that we've got an angle which is pretty interesting. And this exhibition was presented around the world, and actually we also have an Instagram page, so feel free to follow. And mainly, I want to say that Tech God also learned a lot from the documentary God, because creating community culture, communicating with different stakeholders, Scrum managing different projects at a time. These are tools that I'm using up until now as a tech manager, and this is one of my two passions. So if would probably know by now that now in Milio, together with Kadrogel Sheffield, this project that I'm running, are two passions. One of them is team culture, team building, and I'm sharing these passions in my day to day. So just before I dive into my current adventure, I wanted to talk about what influenced me most in the previous workplace. So I had the chance of managing and building teams in previous workplaces. I always try to make an impact on processes, so team and cross team and company wide culture. But the magnitude and hypergrowth of WeWork was a completely different challenge in its uniqueness and volume. So I joined WeWork in 2017 as an engineer at a very, very early stage. And there are lots of great things to say about WeWork, but one of the main things that even or especially when they experienced hypergrowth, they did anything, and I mean anything, to double down on making sure company culture is as best as it could be. Because I'm talking now on behalf of engineers, unlike what people think of us, are actually very working better together as a cohesive, energetic team. We actually love people and we thrive in a community, and there's nothing like positive culture to contribute to it. Um, and there were also although it was a great time, it was also we faced different challenges as engineers, as managers. And for me personally, one used to work in a small startup who could also make impact on every part of the company and all aspects of the company. I suddenly, and not only me, like also my colleagues, suddenly got lost in the hypergrowth company. So we started to share the same concerns together. And while trying to do so, we started by, and this is the beginning of the process that we're going to also catch up in the current workplace. So what we did first is we turned to our famous SWOT diagram. So for those who don't know, SWOT stands for strengths, which is what are we good at, weaknesses, what are our vulnerabilities and or disadvantages, opportunities, so what can we focus on and leverage to leverage our strengths, and threats, which are what requires our immediate attention. So as you can guess, every company, every organization, it doesn't even have to be a tech company, has its own SWOT analysis. And for WeWork, we started to analyze together as a team. So at WeWork, we had, again, great culture. We have an awesome product. I mean, it was WeWork. As weaknesses, our team was not cohesive enough. We were lacking focus. And if we were to start to map the opportunities, we started to understand that we have high potential as engineers and developers. And the major threat that we had is something that we already discussed, is the hypergrowth that we're feeling. So we as a team, we were very open, very sincere, and we discussed over these issues we're currently facing. But again, now what? So what we did now is we try to understand and find answers to the following questions. Team, like what makes a good developer excel? Delivery, which is what make a group of developers an engaged and productive team? And growth, so what makes an engaged team embrace the growth mindset? So these are the when we started to think about the three main questions of what makes a good team work, this is something that we like refined for ourselves. And now we try to understand for each part what it consists of. So for example, team, so how do we take a group of individuals and make sure that we fulfill, they're motivated, they're cohesive, they're engaged, and they work together as a team, right? Because this is, I think, this is a threshold for any successful team. Like it doesn't have to be, even we have the best, it could be players, football players, and it could be the best engineers. A team requires to work as a team, and if it doesn't have that, this is a basic threshold. So we started to define it to culture, to understand that each team member has what impact. We are trying to understand how do we communicate properly, how we give everyone engaged and accountable. So once we have a great team, how can we make sure they're also delivering, right? Because that's what we're here for. So how do we make good processes for visibility? How do we make good process for delivery? How do we aim for and measure quality? And how do we make people accountable for what we're working for? And now, once we have a team that delivers, how do we keep them amplifying and reiterating to keep them on a growth mindset? So how do we learn from the lessons learned? How do we learn from mistakes? How do we share knowledge? How do we onboard new people to the team? So as you might have guessed by the name and the description, this is a very iterative process. It's almost a cyclic process. So there's a team core, leads to delivery, to growth. So by now, this is something that I've defined as a feed forward cycle. So what we had till now is, and this is even the process itself helped us to be more open and sincere and vent about the specific challenges. And we now, when we mapped everything together, and this is something very important, this is something that took us to the next step of it being cohesive by definition, right? Because now we have engineers and product managers and designers talking very openly and defining very openly about all the challenges that we're facing. So for each and every one of these, we also created action items, and this is something that we wanted to do. It was very important. So basically, what we had until now is that the combination of this networking between engineers, product managers, and different stakeholders, a very holistic approach, not a very patchy one that, let's say, oh, the retro process didn't work, or the sprint kickoff wasn't as fully optimized. No, it was the very holistic approach, a very open discussion approach. This is something that really helped us. And the main thing is with the understanding that if you're addressing an unknown challenge in a very structured and fearless way, you can make an impact anytime, anywhere. And we used this very collaborative approach, and we mapped it together as a team. And this is something that we want. I'll mention it again in a few minutes. So I'll get more specific. I'll get to the specific action items later at the talk. But I want to make sure that this is the very important part of the talk. So as a team, the importance of facing as a team, facing the challenge and pausing and dedicating time to talk openly and map together current situation, build a holistic plan, address the challenges, not a patch by patch, not something very patchy, but something very holistic. This is something that is a good approach for every big challenge that everyone is facing. And this is something not only for new teams, but also, for example, for teams that are running for months and years, because people tend to put the challenges as given and not address them. And I know that retro processes are something that people are very, how would you say, um, a critic of, because people are very skeptic about it. And again, once we put everyone in the same room talking about the challenges and mapping them together, this is something that you can face and address anytime, anywhere. And when I said anytime, anywhere, at the time I didn't think of a global pandemic last year, but well, that's it. So now I'm going to talk about this next phase, which is my Melio experience. And as I mentioned, um, after Melio, after WeWork, I started to think about my career path. I think it was like about around almost 2 years ago, year and a half, and I started to think about my next career path and where should I go next. And Melio was a perfect fit for me. It still has a very bright future, new team that I was supposed to help build, startup which is relatively small. This is something that I missed after WeWork, and it had also lots of impact opportunities. And this is basically what I found in Melio. So just a quick overview. This is my team now. I have like now, yeah, I think it's October 2021, 25 beautiful and super talented engineers. And when I joined, it was only this one beautiful engineer called Dima, and I still love him. And this is like a year and a half, a very, very long year and a half, all in remote. So how did it actually started? So everything was set up for my start date. I thought everything would be perfectly fine. I even took some vacation. I wanted to work on my projects, like my football project, and then COVID started to close in on me, and I mean literally. And when this like, I think it was March, and offices started to close in. I scheduled quickly one-on-one meetings with everyone just before I started, and I mean everyone I can think of. We were relatively a small startup, and obviously one day before that specific day, they announced that they are closing all offices. Everyone is working from home, and I started my new workplace from home. So just imagine if starting a new workplace is always a challenge, then how about making an impact while working remotely, right? How do you create culture remotely? How do you build a team framework in remote? So how do we, which are people who are always putting people in the center, always want to make impact in the organization, how can we now cross the physical and communication barriers with people that you actually don't know? So, and I don't know even when or if you're going to meet in person, because it was a very hectic beginning a year and a half ago. So I had to calibrate quickly to the new situation. And basically what I did, this is a tip for new joiners, especially in remote. I actually first spent my first week or two only with one-on-ones with everyone I could imagine. It could be operations, sales, designers, product, engineering, every single person, because I was trying to understand the network, which was now suddenly disconnected because of remote work. And I reached out to other teams just to understand the challenges they're facing, and on the way I paired together with whoever wanted to solve those challenges together. It could be R&D projects, it could be events that we wanted to produce, it could be anything. Just the bare importance of getting the network back online. And it almost took a month until I first met anyone from the team. And I actually remember that moment because it was a very almost, I don't want to say cringy moment, but I remember that I never met the guy. He was a product manager, and we scheduled the meeting, and we scheduled to meet at his backyard for a glass of wine. And I hope that I've been married for too long to remind how blind dates are looking like, but I hope that they were better than this. But that was the first month, and it actually very helped me to shape my values as a remote manager. And by values, I mean um, all the values that I'm talking about were empathy, which is understanding the situation from the employee point of view, communication, how can we use over communication to replace face-to-face corridor small talks, and networking. which is how do we make sure everyone is connected, sharing information, working better together. And the last and most important, I think, while working in remote, um, and actually I talked to Jörg a few moments before, one of the moderators, a few moments before the talk, and he mentioned that his company was working is remote first. So I think that is so much time you're working home at your home office alone. So utilizing this time for a structured self-retrospect or introspection is extremely important, especially when you're always having thoughts and concerns, especially on like very unsecure times. Or and this the last value of introspection, I think this has helped me realize that what if we could stop for a second, look at the situation from a different angle. So maybe working remotely is actually an opportunity. Maybe it could have actually strengthened engineering culture. Maybe it's an opportunity for teams to scale better now when physical barriers are not an issue. So we turn again to our best friend, the SWOT diagram. So what we're going to talk about next is the SWOT analysis for the remote work that we were facing in hypergrowth, action items, and I think one of the most important thing is the group framework, which is something that is the next step for our group now. And because we scaled so much so well until now, and now we want to try to understand what is the good way or process to create a stable and another framework to double our team. So we were going to talk about SWOT analysis for growth and working remotely. So basically, again, we have awesome, amazing people with great vibes. I'm talking about the very beginning, like 2 or 3 months after we started. I think we were 4 or 5 engineers by then, and we are still a very successful company. But the weakness is that we were a very small team, which is an issue. But the opportunities we had is like we're always growing. There's lots of things to do. But again, the threats are, oh my God, there's a global pandemic and hyper growth. And when you try to map what are the challenges with, oh my God, there's a global pandemic, we realize that communication is an issue, culture, onboarding new people is very is a problem. Mainly when I'm talking about people that you never met, people that don't get the vibes, people that don't get the culture right, and it also affects the morale. Velocity is an issue, of course, because suddenly when communication is slower, development velocity is lower. People are less engaged, right? Because they have lots of other things that are on their mind. And also hypergrowth, because hypergrowth, again, onboarding is an issue. People suddenly don't get as much focus as the third, fourth engineer. And collaboration between engineers is something which is um, every hyper growing company knows that it's an issue they're going to face. Knowledge sharing, suddenly it's not between 5 people, it's between 20. Personal goals, we all know company grows, suddenly people's personal goals are less important maybe for the company because the company is so big. And also velocity. So this is a very high level analysis, but the process of analyzing current status was itself part of the networking, because I had to reach out to people. I had to ask for their advice, their experience in the company and from their career. So the entire process, and this reminds of what happened in WeWork. So the entire process in remote helped us generate a very collaborative energy. So we're all in the same boat. Doesn't matter if we're engineers, managers, designers, and we can and should work together to define the problem and then solve it as a team. So now, as we mapped everything in a collaborative way, after we raised awareness that everyone is part of the process, everyone is together in this, no one is left behind. Now we need to manifest these ideas to something more realistic. So we talked about specific action items. Before I start to talk about specific action items, that reminds us of the feed forward cycle. So what we had until now. So we had SWOT items that we mapped together as a team, the gaps where we wanted to be as a team, and then we defined the feed forward cycle for team empowerment. where we have defined buckets for matching processes and action items. As you remember, we have team, delivery, and growth. Each one relies and depends on the previous one. Each one also amplifies the next one. And now, finally, what's left to do is define what are the right processes for each one of them. So let's start walk through specific action items we created. I'd love to hear more, but this is something that helped us a lot during remote work in the past year. So, for example, in the teamwork, in the team category, we had 2 syncs a day. So the first sync was like a very usual daily, everyone knows, very technical. It was like something like 10 a.m. And when then at the very early stage, we decided to have another more light version at like around 3 p.m. or a coffee break together as a team. And what we did is we started to simply invite different coworkers to our coffee break. And this actually contributed us to be more dynamic. It also had helped us to get to know other people from different departments. It made everyone more accessible. We got to know each other better, and we gave people the chance of actually talking about what they work instead of just saying hi in a very long, awkward corridor. So this may sound like very niche or um, very small action item, but again, we're going to talk about it and more. But these kind of meetings and these kind of things actually contributed more than I thought of. I could imagine. Like think of people are just staying at home, one after a daily, just left behind for the next up until the next day. But now we've like out of this situation that everyone is struggling to be not to be disconnected. Now we have like a good, great platform of good vibes and creating a culture in remote. And also trying when we started to invite other people, they also it was very like viral effect of good vibes and good morale and good communication and networking. It was very, 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 very important. So it works perfectly. I couldn't imagine how we worked. Not we didn't work without it. We revamped our boarding process. It was super important for us to upgrade our boarding process. With much more tighter, much more personal. We focused on interaction with colleagues and one-on-ones with peers. So we were aiming to have more focus, to give the new joiners a very warm welcome, very structured onboarding for everyone. We have the trail board created for everyone with all the tasks, all the one-on-ones, all the culture events, all the Slack channels, everything. And this is something that again still very happening and very nice. And something that also was nice, and we're going to practice it again next week. We're joining with new 3 more engineers. Um, because of the open air policy, I guess it's something every country is now facing. Actually, we met and had both our one-on-ones and new joiners. We had like picnics in gardens, which is extremely nice. Just a bottle of wine. People are bringing nice food, and while people are waiting for their one-on-one, they are catching up. And this is something that I couldn't dream of now when offices are back. And this is actually super, super nice. We created a branded Slack channel to make the company content such as team spotlights or cool updates or throwbacks from the past in a much more engaging and fun way instead of just simply sending a boring newsletter. We created like a nice avatar that it has its own language. It's called Build a Bot because our company is handling bills. That's the pun. And this is something that was very, very nice. It was very engaging. People got more engaged of what teams are working on, both in Israel, in New York, and Minsk, and in all of our sites. And when we were much, much smaller, we started to have our syncs, our weekly syncs, almost daily syncs, much more group level. Why is that? Because first of all, we wanted to over communicate, which is something that we, as you probably understood from by now, This is a very important value that shared between that's this helps to address and face any challenge from hypergrowth and remote work. And the group level syncs helped not only because we over communicated and shared what people are working on, what different teams are working on, and now I'm talking about I think half a year after I started, which means we were like 8 or 10 people. But it also meant that people their daily meetings or weekly kickoffs didn't or weren't consist of only 1 or 2 people. For example, if one person couldn't make it to the daily, suddenly the daily is just 2 persons and a cat. So we thought weekly kickoff was at a group level, like 10 or 12 people together, sharing their weekend stories, more fun, more engaged. People are not feeling alone. So weekly kickoffs and group level things in general, something when in remote, especially when in a very early stage, super super important. We signed up engineers from our remote sites in Belarus to English lessons. I need one, I think, also. I'll get to it right after this talk. But again, we were doubling down on communication, and I think that is something that was super important. Team days. Team days is something super nice that when we started to come back to the offices, we didn't want some people to come on Sunday, on Mondays, some people on Wednesdays, the last person just alone on Tuesday. So what we did, we decided together as a team, again, in a very open way. We decided which days we want to come as a team together, and also eat together, meet, talk, celebrate like happy hour at the end of the day. And this is something very important that we were keeping everyone very close together when possible. And so we're also consolidating meetings that we want to do in person to that day. This also cleared our calendars from like we had all the focus. We cleared our calendar to focus on work from other days, and we knew that when we meet together, we have all the meetings that we didn't want to ruin our focus on the rest of the week. Um, and actually, again, offsites went much cooler when working in remote. So this is, for example, not only we're working from parks or people's rooftops, we also start to work from the beach. It's about, in general, it's about thinking outside of the box and together. And you'll be so surprised once you get people around the table talking openly, asking for their opinions, for the suggestions. People are super super creative. This was team, but now let's talk about delivery. So now that we have action items, and there are much more action items, but action items around getting the team together as a team. So now delivery. So we've defined a very very that it's basically together we define the checklist of our development cycle checklist. Again, this is something that we want to do, especially when we're working in remote, because we wanted to have full visibility, transparency between different stakeholders and engineers. It helped us a lot. Again, this is something that we are always reiterating on this checklist. Actually, I don't know if it's still, um, how do you say, if it's still up to date. But again, this is something that we're always working on, and it helps us, especially when people are working not side by side in the same open space, but everyone from his home. We signed up people for feature to be feature owners, to lead, to be more accountable, to make sure that people are engaged, and we wanted to pair them together between senior and less senior. One time the less senior is learning from the senior person that is leading the feature. Next time the less senior person will lead with the guidance of the senior one. Again, it's about creating opportunities and networking. It's about giving people the chance not only to be accountable, but also to grow and thrive from communicating and interacting. And this is something that I don't want to say we want to structure, right? I almost use the word force, but we want to structure ways that people should communicate and pair and work as a team. And it's most of the time, if we're not structuring this, People will just, okay, I'll pick this task, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll pick this feature, let's talk in a week. No, we wanted to be more structured, in a structured way, to make people work together as a team, together as a group of people. Um, this is one example about delivery, about dev forum. Just quickly run through it. Um, this is a very important one because it helped us, and I know that I saw it, we saw it as a challenge in many companies about knowledge sharing. And so we started to understand, after we got feedback from different engineers, and we started to map our strength, our SWOT, as an engineering team. So we understood that senior engineers want to mentor, junior engineers wanted to grow. Retro meetings, on the other hand, weren't effective. Recurring issues were happening. And as opportunities, we saw that engineers were willing to allocate time to grow. And this is something that we also wanted to provide them, growing opportunities. But again, as threats, velocity is affected by bugs. Engineers are not growing as we expect. So what we proposed is a 1 hour bi-weekly meeting for developers only. So just for sharing knowledge. So what we did, we created a Trello board. Each engineer can post with 4 buckets or 4 columns about bugs, issues, learnings, tech work, tech updates, and everyone can add cards with a time that estimates of how much discussion time he wants to talk about. And it could be, like, for example, latest refactoring car task, recurring PR comments, bug that was found and how we could avoid it. And it turns out to be a very good result, because engineers had more transparency of the work being done. Engineers had a place to share their knowledge. Like, suddenly people started to grow from this, to learn, and development related topics that weren't raised finally were addressed. Right, retro meetings that don't get so technical. Junior engineers learn from senior engineers. Engineers share their stories. So all these processes are something that we learned together and created together from scratch. And this is about delivery. And the last one is just before we're going to talk about next steps. And the next step is actually very interesting. Growth. So as a reminder, we're talking about the team, right? The first stage, delivery, and now we have the growth. Well, like, once we have a good team that delivers, we need to make sure that the team is still growing and learning from its experiences and uh, from each other. So we've created, and how do you say, we've signed up everyone for a 1%, which is a nice application that helps you form a habit of learning and growing. Highly recommend it. We created the demos, which is now, when meetings are company demos, now when meetings are so accessible, we just invite the entire company. No need to organize a room for 200 people. We just share a link. Demo suddenly made more. Suddenly demos are much more accessible, and now it's much easier to get, and people are more engaged. And this is something that we created in WeWork, which is mainly around people to get, how do we get people more engaged and proud of what they did. Reminds of the demo. So one of the things that we, if we remember, considered the threat in the SWOT analysis of WeWork is hypergrowth we experienced and how the team might lose its meaning. So we created a design, the super design branded newsletter for the team, where we share the entire company, what we achieved, demoed some of the feature. We even asked for a friend to, as a cameraman, to take our photos for our team member spotlights. So this really helped the team to become more engaged, proud, because suddenly they were feeling important in a very large company, and they made it, the team, more cohesive. So this is something that we, how do you say, um, this is something that helped us close the feed forward circle and make it run together. And again, once these framework items, and again, there are much more, and I guess that you can think of something that's much more custom for or adjusted for your culture or for your teams. But once you add them all together, and it could be, like the afternoon sync is a very small one, the Slack channel is something very small, but once you have dozens of small, medium, large items, everyone is addressing, everyone is accountable for, everyone understand the importance, because it came from them, it came from the team, it didn't came from top bottom, it came from the team itself. People will get more engaged and more accountable. And I think this is something that, when working in remote, and when everyone is working from different sites, and when people have the, how do you say, when people have the, when we feel that we might lose someone or leave someone behind, I think that giving people the accountability together with over communicating is something that could push the team together. But this is what we did up until now, and what we're doing the next step is thinking about the next step of Groove Framework, because we're now 25 engineers, we're thinking forward. This is something, again, super important, always thinking about the next steps. So what we did, we mapped together, again, now when I think we were 20 engineers, we sat and mapped together all the parts of areas that we want to improve. And again, I don't mean that we're not doing it right, but again, everyone needs to always improve. And what we did is we created one pagers for all of these areas that we wanted to improve. The one pagers that we created consists of the problem statement, current status, and high level general goals. We suggested these to all the engineers to ask who wants to lead what. For example, one engineer wanted to lead the testing task force. One engineer wanted to work on the knowledge sharing and growth. And what happens next is each engineer will pair with a engineering manager or tech lead. Doesn't have to be his own engineering manager or the team lead he's working or the tech lead he's working on. On the contrary, we want to make a mix between the team to make people more engaged within the group. So, for example, an engineer from one team wants to work on the testing task force together with an engineering manager from another team. So suddenly, people are more engaged in the company within the group. And the next step is we're going to give 1 month period of each pair, each task force to research to understand how do we do, for example, testing in the like Facebook, Google tier companies. How do we do testing in small startups, medium companies? 1 month just to research, just to plan ahead, just to create a timeline, define MVPs, to own this as a product, own this as almost as a feature, and we want to create. This is a great growing opportunities for engineers to lead something that they're passionate about. Uh,
Gad, thank you for all that insight.
mhm.
Um, we have some open questions. Short reminder: if you have any further questions, please post it on the right tab on the question and answer, and you will get or you can win an ebook from our media sponsor Pact. And Gad, I wonder, have you ever met your direct teammates in person so far yet?
Yes. By the time, like, after the first 1 2 months, we started to get back in the office very cautiously, and by then we start to have like hybrid. Now we're working in hybrid, like we're working 2 days a week from the office, 3 week, like, depends on the COVID situation. Like, we had different periods of lockdowns that we had to work back again from remote. But yeah, most of the team, like, we met all of the team members by now. But again, some of the culture is the good structure and framework of the team is still echoing from the time that we work remotely and created the culture to work.
Mm. And you have mentioned how you are doing the one-to-ones, but are you also doing feedback talks online? And how are you doing then?
Very cautiously. we were now now we're aiming to do all the feedback talks and one-on-ones in person. This is something that we're trying to do. It's very important for us. Actually, this is something that as managers we have like meetings moving all around, but the only talks that in the calendar invites themselves there is like a warning: do not override, do not move, is the one-on-ones. Super important, especially in times like this. So
Okay. Thanks, God, so far for that great session.
awesome.
Um, okay. Thank you all for attending and wish you all a nice finishing keynote here at Big Data Conference. See you next time. Bye.
Bye bye, thank you.